Welcome to Excel's ultimate lookup function, XLOOKUP. Now wait a second. VLOOKUP, one of the most popular Excel functions in history, the ones that all of the employers ask us about, we're not going to use that anymore. We're going to have to learn XLOOKUP. Well, the good news is it does so much more than VLOOKUP. And if you can believe this, it's much easier to use. You are not going to believe what XLOOKUP can do. It does exact match by default. When you do approximate match, you don't even have to sort the table. It can find the last value when there's duplicates. It can look up left. It can do horizontal or vertical lookup or both at the same time. It can look up the whole row, the whole column, return multiple items, and much more. Now, XLOOKUP is only an Office 365 Insider, and it will replace much of what we've done in the past with VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, Match, Index, and Lookup. Does that mean all these functions are dead? Well, no. There are still uses for these, and we'll see later in the video. But most of the uses for all these functions, we can wrap them all up into one function, XLOOKUP. Now there's 27 amazing examples in this video. So be sure to check out below the video. There's a time hyperlink table of contents. And of course, you can download the Excel workbook and follow along. Now on the XLOOKUP and XMatch sheets, there are some notes, including screenshots from some of the new arguments in these functions. You can come back and look at these notes later. We'll go through all of these exciting new options in our examples. We're going to start on the sheet 1 to 3. Now we're going to start with exact match lookup. I need to look up quad in this first column here and then jump over to the fourth column to get the price and bring it back to the cell. Here's the old method. In VLOOKUP, we had a lookup value. The table with all 4 columns, we had to list which column had the item we want to go and get and bring back to the cell. And look at this. We had to tell it 0 for exact match. And guess what? In VLOOKUP, that was not the default. The default was approximate match. The new way equals XL tab. There are 5 arguments. The last 2 are optional, and we'll look at those later. But for a basic exact match lookup, lookup value, well, I'm looking up the quad, comma, lookup array. That means only the column where we take that value and try to find a match, comma, return array. Look at this. We do not have to highlight all 4 columns, just those 2 columns. That means 2 things. We do not have an argument to say which column has the thing I want to go and get. And later, if we insert a column, it'll already know the correct column to try and go and get something from and the column it needs to match. And for exact match, that's it. Close parentheses and enter. So we didn't have to put a 0 for exact match like VLOOKUP. And if I come up here, right-click, insert. Well, of course, VLOOKUP is still looking at the 4th column, but XLOOKUP, that column price, automatically updated to F3 to F6. So for exact match lookup, that's quite an improvement. Lookup array, return array. We don't have to put the column index number or the 0 for exact match. Now, how did Microsoft think this up? Equals LOO lookup. This is the original lookup function all the way back to the first spreadsheet, VisiCalc. Lookup value was the same, but lookup vector and result vector, back in the original lookup function, they had it right, separating the column we get a match and the items we want to retrieve into 2 different arguments. Now, we only looked at the first 3 arguments. Now let's look at the last 2 arguments. Over on the sheet 4.5, well, we saw how to do exact match with the new XLOOKUP function, but how do we do approximate match lookup? We're going to use units, and here's our approximate match lookup table. The first column is sorted, which is required for VLOOKUP and match, and the 4th column has our discount. Now, some of the ways we used to do it in the past we could use the original lookup function. And actually, I still teach this in some of my classes because this is the fastest way to do this if you really have a reliable table that's always sorted. Enter. If we're worried about inserting columns, we could use lookup that way. And of course, most people use VLOOKUP. Notice that we're not using the last argument in VLOOKUP because the default is approximate match lookup. Now here's how we do it with equals XL tab. Well, we have a lookup value, comma, and we get to split the column where we're making a match, comma, and the column that has the items we're trying to retrieve and bring back to the cell. We get to split those apart, comma, and here it is, match mode. The default is exact match. -1 means, and this is brand new, this option right here is what we now use when we want to use approximate match like VLOOKUP. Now notice what it says, exact match or next smaller item. Now the way they worded this is much easier to understand than the way the help used to describe it. It used to say, hey, we're going to take this lookup value and find the biggest value that is less than or equal to the lookup value. So the biggest value in this column that is less than or equal to that is 48. So it gets 0.43. But now we don't have to worry about that. We use this option for approximate match, and it's much easier to understand. It can't find an exact match in here when it's looking up 73, but we know it's right there, and so it takes the next smaller one. Now again, using any of these options in this fourth argument do not require that we sort the data set in any particular way. So tab for -1, close parentheses, and that's the new way that we do approximate match lookup. Now let's look at one other example. Well, wait a second, that's the same one we just did. But look at this, there's the fourth argument, search mode. First to last, that's the default. Last to first, we'll see that one in a moment. And look at this, binary search. That was the technical term for the old approximate match. Right here, sorted ascending order and descending order. This would be like match using -1. Let's just try this. This is the old binary search, tab, close parentheses, and enter. Now let's see what happens when we sort. Right click, we'll sort Z to A. Oh, they all break except for the amazing new XLOOKUP with -1. Control Z, and it doesn't matter. We could have some crazy sort order, and it still works. Control Z, so we can do approximate match, and we never have to worry about sorting. Now we want to go to our next sheet. And the lookup situation is we have a pipe, and it's 11 inches. But when we find a match in this column, it's not exact match. I need approximate match. But when we find an approximate match, I need to find the biggest value in this column that is greater than or equal to 11. So the biggest value that's greater than 11 is 12 inches. Then I can retrieve land square footage that that pipe can be used for drainage. Now, how did we do it before XLOOKUP? Well, we used match, and that was that very rarely used match type -1. But now we use XL tab. There's the pipe. That's our lookup value, comma. Trying to find a match there, comma. Here's the values we're trying to retrieve, comma. And here's the fourth argument, exact match, approximate match. Here's approximate match, but guess what? It'll find exact or the next larger value. Now, there's one other option here, wildcard. We'll see that later. So when I hit tab, close parentheses, we have looked up the correct square footage. Now let's go look at our next example. And in this example, we have a lookup situation where I need to find the last one. Well, before XLOOKUP, we'd use an array formula inside of lookup. That construction would always get, as we copy down, the last entered item for each product. But with XL tab, it's so much easier. I'm looking up that comma within this range right here, comma. I'm trying to get the units, comma. Match mode, we're going to assume exact, so I'm going to leave it empty. And there it is. I can use the second argument, -1, search last to first. That means there's lots of duplicates here for Carlota, and it's getting the last one. Now, this option here does depend on how it's sorted in the worksheet. But sometimes that's exactly what you want. Close parentheses, Control Enter. and copy it down. I'm going to go to the last cell and hit F2. Uh-oh, I forgot to lock. Look at that. F2, and I'll do the same trick as in earlier. Click on the screen tip, F4. Click F4, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. Now notice I forgot to lock and I got into trouble. Well, if we're using XLOOKUP, that means we have the correct version. Why don't we just use equal unique? I'm going to get a unique list of items from that column. This is a new array function. When I hit enter, because there's multiple items, it spills. F2, well, what if I want it sorted? I simply sort, enter. Now this is a spilled array. I can see the actual formula up there. The cells below do not have the actual formula. Lookup value. If I highlight all of them, it puts the syntax for please look in the top cell with the formula, but get the whole array, comma. I need to try and match in product, comma. Get the units, comma, comma. Down arrow. I want the last one, tab, close parentheses. And because that's multiple items, XLOOKUP will know to spill. All right, let's go to our next example. Well, I'm not going to even do this one because we already did it. If there are duplicates in lookup array, since we're using the default, comma, exact match, comma, first to last, this construction right here will always get the first units for whatever that product is. We could do spill, and that's how we did it in older versions, right? Exact match, when there were duplicates, always got just the first one. Let's look at example 9. What does lookup left mean? Well, if we're looking up the range of a boomerang and we need to find a match in this column and then jump to the left to go and get the name of the product that has that range, well, VLOOKUP could not have the match column in the middle of the table. It could only have it if it was the first column. In earlier versions, it was no problem. We switch over to index and match. Hey, we're trying to get something from there, and then match finds the relative position for index, and together they can look up to the left. Well, XLOOKUP has no problem looking up that 22 in a lookup array in the middle of the table, because guess what? This return array, we can put it wherever we want. If it's to the left or to the right or down below, it'll work fine. Now, the caveat is you have to look at lookup array. And since it's looking vertically through 1, 2, 3, 4 different cells, that means return array has to have 4 rows, just like the lookup array. But for lookup left, XLOOKUP can do it. Now let's go look at example 10. Now XLOOKUP can do horizontal lookup, vertical lookup, and even sometimes both. How did we used to do vertical lookup? Well, we all know V is for vertical. Now when we use XLOOKUP, as long as there's the same number of vertical cells in both ranges, vertical lookup is easy. We used to do horizontal lookup with, of course, H is for horizontal, HLOOKUP. XLOOKUP has no problem. As long as there's 1, 2, 3, 4 columns in the first and the second, XLOOKUP can do horizontal. Now, once in a while, we have to do both. It's rare. Before XLOOKUP, index and match had no problem. Index had the items to return, and look at that, they're vertical. And match had no problem looking through a horizontal range because match would just count and find the relative position to and pull out the correct price. Well, XLOOKUP can't really do that. So if you want to do it, and the first range is horizontal, you're going to have to transpose vertical range to horizontal. Now let's look at two-way lookup. Example 11. This is a typical two-way lookup. I'm looking up income, and I need to look up exemptions. This is a two-way lookup tax table. I need to get that 7% and bring it back. One of the old ways for doing two-way lookup, of course, was index with match match. Now we get to learn something really cool about XLOOKUP. If I start by looking up just the exemptions, I look through this range and give it a table that has the same number of columns but multiple rows, it'll deliver the entire column. This is how you would look up a column. So we're going to look up exemption, comma, and for lookup array, we're counting. There's 5 columns, comma. So return array, we know it has to have 5 columns, but it can have as many rows as we want. Now, comma, match mode. We're definitely doing -1 because in a tax situation, we could have more and we want it to pick up anything equal to whatever it might be out here or the next smaller item. So -1, close parentheses. Now when I hit enter, it spills the array. It looked up the whole column. Now that we have 5 rows and 1 column, and I'm going to cheat, I'm going to copy this, Control-C, escape, equals XL tab. We're looking up income, comma, 5 rows, 1 column. That's the lookup array, comma, return array, Control-V. And I have to make sure, comma, and do match mode, -1, close parentheses. Now I want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 arguments, but it works. 1,500, no problem. Both of these work. Now, we already saw one example where an old function in some situations was going to be more efficient to create. It's the same with two-way lookup. If I have a tax table, and tax tables like this are almost always sorted consistently, I'm using VLOOKUP to look up the income, comma, get the entire table, comma, and for column index number, we'll use 2 functions just like XLOOKUP, XLOOKUP. But now I'll look up exemptions within this range right here. And because match and VLOOKUP by default do approximate match, that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments. Close, close, and enter. So XLOOKUP and some other options can do two-way lookup. Now notice XLOOKUP looked up a column, so let's go look at example 12. If our goal is to look up a product and then add values, well, how did we used to do it? We would use index. Match would get the row number, and we would either leave column number empty or put a 0, and that would say get all the columns. Well, there's an easier way with XLOOKUP. We're looking up quad, comma, within 4 rows, 1 column. And as long as the table has 4 rows, we can put as many columns as we want. When I close parentheses, it will spill to the right. If I move this down there, I really want to add, Control-Z. So I put it inside of sum. And there we are looking up a row. Enter. Example 13. If our goal is to look up a particular month and then get the whole column, lookup array has 3 columns. Return array has those 3 columns. But when we look it up, it'll give us the correct column, and sum will add. If we go to our next sheet, well, we just saw that XLOOKUP can return multiple items. But this is a common task when we need to retrieve the whole record. Now, before XLOOKUP and before filter, if we really wanted the whole record, then we could use columns inside of column index number and then copy it to the side. We could use VLOOKUP with an array constant. We also could use filter to simply filter to show only a particular record in that data set. That does involve knowing how to use that operator right there. So it sort of seems like XLOOKUP. I'm looking this up, comma, within this. 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, return array. And watch this. I'm going to highlight the same number of rows, but 4 columns. 3 to 6, 3 to 6. That's the important part. However many columns we have is how many values that XLOOKUP will spill. Close parentheses and enter. Now these methods return exactly the columns in the particular order they're in. If we want something more dynamic on our next sheet, now our goal is to return the entire record, but not in the same order as up in the lookup table. I don't want price in the 4th position. I want it in the 2nd position. Older methods, well, of course, we could use VLOOKUP. And then for column index number, we just look up the correct field name for our column index number. Now, just for fun, we could use VLOOKUP and match and do a function argument array operation on all of the columns inside of match. That would spill the correct record in the correct order. Here's how we do it with XLOOKUP. We first look up product within those 4 rows, and we give it the entire table. This, as we saw a moment ago when I hit enter, will look up the record, but it's in the wrong order. Now we need to rearrange the columns. F2. We use a second XLOOKUP. But guess what? For lookup value, we're going to give it all 4 columns in the correct order. 4 lookup values means that XLOOKUP, comma, when we give it lookup array, we'll get the correct 4 relative positions, comma, and the combination of lookup value and lookup array delivering correct relative positions or column numbers will rearrange that horizontal range. And when I hit enter, it spills in the correct order. Now, if we wanted to go old school and use index, guess what? These are 2 row number, column number, exact match lookups. So instead of using match, guess what? We're going to use the new X match. Lookup value, I need to get the row number, comma, so I'm looking up the product. And the last 2 arguments inside of X match, comma, match mode, comma, search mode, exactly the same as XLOOKUP. And guess what? The default is exact match. So that's all we have to put, comma, X match. And here we're going to get tricky since we're trying to get the correct relative positions. Lookup value, we highlight all 4, comma. Within that range, we're doing exact match. Nothing else is required. Close, close, and that will spill. Now, here's probably my favorite method. And here's another example where I think I might be using VLOOKUP. I want to look up this, comma, within that table, and I need column index. X match comes to the rescue. I'm doing a function argument array operation. I put 4 items. Match will deliver the correct 4 relative positions for VLOOKUP, as long as I give it that range, close parentheses, and column index number. If I F9, 1432, that is just too cool. Control Z. Now I do need to remember comma. Since approximate match is the default, I need to put 0 to tell VLOOKUP to do exact match. But when I hit enter, it spills. So there's a bunch of different ways we can retrieve a record while ordering the columns the way we want. Now, example 22. What if we wanted to just simply rearrange the columns? Look up the field names within the field names, and I gave it the whole table. So when I hit Control Enter, it spills the column, and then I can copy it to the side. Now, there's a few other examples if you want to download and check those out. Now, the next 5 examples, 23 to 27, we're not going to do them, but I do want to quickly show you some important tips. If our goal is to look up February to November and then add, well, we used to use 2 index functions, and the colon would force the lookup functions to look up cell references. Well, no problem. We can do that with XLOOKUP. This XLOOKUP is looking up the cell reference for February. That one's looking up November. If I hit F9, it doesn't show me the cell references, but I can clearly see that I'm getting exactly what I want. Example 24, looking up a picture with a combination of defined names and a picture. That's the old formula we used to use. Well, guess what? XLOOKUP works just as well. Example 25. Uh-oh. Now, when you have multiple tables, I have a video here with much better methods than XLOOKUP. We could use switch, if, is, choose, and even the indirect function. Now, the advantage to using anything, as seen in this video, for looking up tables is that we only have 3 tables to look up. The problem, as I see it, with XLOOKUP is we have 2 arrays. So if we have 3 tables, we have to do 1 lookup for the first column and then a second lookup for whatever subsequent column there is. Example 26. No problem. Earlier functions could use wildcards. Asterisk means 0 or more characters. Question mark means a single character. So if I want to look up cola but find Coca-Cola, I simply join wildcard on either side, and it will look it up. The only difference here when using XLOOKUP, well, we have our 2 arrays. The 4th argument, comma, we have to put a 2 for wildcard. 2, close parentheses, and then we can use wildcards. Now, the last example, example 27. If our goal was to do a complicated array calculation as part of our lookup, well, a lot of the times we used the lookup function. Sometimes we used index and aggregate. But guess what? I'm using that same array formula right inside lookup array. And XLOOKUP can do it too. All right, that was an epic video with 27 examples of Excel's ultimate lookup function, XLOOKUP. Now, if you like what you see in this video, click that subscribe button. because guess what? There'll be lots more videos, including more XLOOKUP. We'll see you next video.